everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, His church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison.
My name's Brandon Bonner.
And we'll be your host. All right, on today's episode, we're talking about science versus faith. Are they really enemies? And I think this will be an interesting podcast to talk. Why are you grinning?
Because your cadence on the intro is weird. I don't know if you caught that. But anyway, sorry.
No, I've already moved on to the topic. So you need to get yourself together. Science and faith. Are they enemies? Are they compatible? So for generations, science and faith have been portrayed as competing explanations of reality. But are they truly at odds, or do they answer different kinds of questions? Exploring history, discovery, and worldviews reveals that the conflict may be far more cultural than factual. Okay. That's my little intro.
Yep.
What do you think, cultural or factual? Science and faith, friends or foes?
I think that they are compatible. I feel like we sometimes as Christians like try to put a black and white on everything, because there is maybe this faux pas that science and faith cannot coexist. I do think there are certain things in the science community that are not, they're theories. They're not factual statements yet. And I think a lot of people in the science community might read a theory, a hypothesis, and completely run with it as like, this is a fact.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's not true. So I think on both ends of the spectrum, like some folks in the science community might say, hey, we made the scientific discovery and it proves that this cannot be true in the Bible, which it maybe is not actually what's happening. Or maybe we have read into something in Scripture and say, hey, this says that this scientific fact can't coexist. They cannot coexist, so Bible takes precedence and science is a sham.
Yeah, I think I have some natural bias towards academia, and I think part of it is because I've read enough and seen enough to know that there is a strong environment in academia that has been created where you just don't question the theories, such as the theory of evolution. Mm-hmm. And so there tends to be a worldview that has been established because of academia where we no longer question that. It's not theory, it's fact. And so anybody that has anything that remotely pushes against that, especially if you're in academia, it's career suicide to go against that ingrained, inculcated worldview. And so I have some bias towards that because some of the stuff that they put out there, it's not good science. It's based on things that have been disproven, but that doesn't get published. That doesn't get put out there. And so we keep running with in some cases a false picture. And that's not so good. So that creates some of the idea that science and faith are not compatible. If we want to cut to the chase, God created science. Mm-hmm. So they are compatible. They're supposed to be compatible. One of the most interesting books I've read was by a guy by the name of Dr. Francis Collins. I believe he was a microbiologist or molecular biologist. And he worked under the Clinton administration. He led the team that mapped out the human DNA under President Bill Clinton, the human DNA genome program. And so he's the scientist that led that actually got that whole thing done, which is probably one of the biggest things for science that's ever been done. He was an atheist, but through his work and research, he became a Christian. And so he wrote a book called The Language of God, and he argues for a merger of biology and logos, which is the word, God. So he created this company called BioLogos. And so, some of his stuff is interesting, but he thinks that God used an evolutionary process to bring mankind to a place where we're at today. And I don't want to get into the ins and outs of that. His approach, though, is that these two things are very compatible because God led it, God designed it. So when I think about this from the standpoint of a Christian, what I see from the people in my camp is a stance that is very aggressive towards the scientific community. And I don't think that that's a great thing. Mm-hmm. What do you see?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that there's a general hesitancy towards, and I feel like this is not just a Christian movement. This is like I'm thinking like general distrust in institutions that our country's going through. Like we just don't trust things as much as we used to. And, credibility has suffered a lot. And I think in the Christendom, the Christian faith, I think that's also been something that's kind of been surprising as someone that didn't grow up in the church, of like the general distrust in science, when there's actually some really good, and we had conversations about this when I was a freshman in college, because I went to a class and the professor said, hey, here's what we're going to teach in this class, and basically if you're a Christian, it's not going to agree with anything that you believe, and I'm going to present it as fact, because it is what he said in quotes. Yeah. And I remember going to him like, Craig, how's this compatible? And we talked a lot about different apologetic arguments, and one of them was like intelligent design. Mm-hmm. And that for me was one of the most powerful arguments and convicting things. It's like, well, yeah, you look at our human bodies and the DNA structure and everything about us, and you can see that there's an intelligent designer in who we are. We were talking about, I have some friends in the medical field, and they always are talking about all the complexities of the human body. Yeah. And how many things are just going on between us right now inside our bodies that we don't even know, we're not consciously doing. It's just keeping us alive. Yeah. And just the science behind that, and it's all very intentional and designed and down to like molecular levels and cells, and they're all like, they're designed, they have functions, and they do things. Right. That for me, it's like you have to acknowledge that this wasn't just random assignment of things that happened and come together and created anything.
Yeah. And talking about the science piece of it, the biology piece of it, there's been some brilliant minds over the years. Molecular biologists that I've already mentioned, that mathematicians who have tried to quantify the statistical probability of life emerging by chance, which is, that's the backbone of evolutionary hypothesis theory. And when you begin to really look at the factual numbers of it, and you begin to understand how the proteins in the body work, and just how improbable it is that they all lined up in such a way that would create life. You're talking about numbers, the odds, the probability. You're talking about numbers that are so incredibly vast that they defy any possible explanation other than some designer, some creator. And there's been books written about, just how complex our DNA double helix is and all the information that contained. It's more advanced than any computer program that has ever been written. It's mind-boggling when you get down into the the small micro level of the human body. And so you look at that, and you come back from that, and you have to ask the question, is there more faith required on the part of people who believe in evolutionary biology, who don't believe in a creator God? Does that require more faith? Because when you look at the numbers, they're impossible, versus a Christian who believes that there's a designer, a God who who is intelligent, who has purpose, who created this world and everything that was required in this world to have life. And so I think what happens, and you correct me if I'm wrong or you've heard something differently, I think the two extreme positions on that butt heads because they're insecure in where they stand. I think that the Christian who loses his mind when somebody says they believe in evolution is coming from the stance that you can't challenge God whatsoever, and they're scared because maybe their faith isn't as strong as they claim that their faith is. Right. And the person coming from the other side of that may be aware of the mathematical improbabilities, but they've hung everything about themselves in their life on that stance, and to change that would mean they have to walk away from something.
Yep. Yeah. No. Totally agree. I think that's and again that's on us to strengthen our faith, study, approach these questions. I think there's a general avoidance sometimes for this. Evolution, I think, is probably one of the biggest arguments maybe between science and faith. People are like, well, that didn't happen, and well, yeah, it did. I don't know. There's a ton of different arguments on it. But I think it could be reasonable. It's not unreasonable to think that God created fully evolved creatures. And so you could tie it back to evolution. I mean, or God creating evolution, however you want to look at it. I mean, I don't think that's unreasonable. And I think there's other things that we could kind of go down that same train of thought. We don't have to box God in.
Yeah, and I think we get too caught up in the hows of how he decided, because we don't know when he created. We don't know what the process looked like. We're just told the creation account in Genesis, but we don't, outside of what he has said, we don't know, we can't say conclusively that he didn't use some type of system in place to bring us to that point. And so we pick up the story at that point where maybe we have reached this place where he wants to breathe life into mankind. We don't know that. To me, when people ask, it's like, do you believe that God allowed guided evolution is what it's called, which honestly is more impressive than if he just snapped his fingers and created us as is. So I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but at the end of the day, I don't see how it matters because nobody knows exactly for sure. We weren't there. We didn't see how he did it. And at the end of the day, even if you're going to go along the lines of the evolution side of things, you go back and you go back and you go back. Where did the stuff begin that allowed that to happen? If you go with the Big Bang Theory, there was this very dense ball that explodes, right? Well, where did the ball come from?
Right.
Because something does not come from nothing. Mm-hmm. And so when you push back and you go all the way to the very beginning of where something started, you had to have something that started it. And so that's really where, atheists and evolutionists have a hard time, because it's like, okay, well, yeah, what do we do with that?
You may have said this a long time ago, or someone else I was talking about, but basically someone's like, there's always going to become a point where you're not going to have 100% empirical evidence. There's not going to be probably something that comes out and says, okay, here is 100% factual evidence that God is not real, and vice versa. There's a level, what I'm trying to say is there's a level of faith that's going to be required, regardless of where you fall on the spectrum.
Right, both positions.
If you're a hardcore scientist, you don't believe in God, you're an atheist, there's a level of faith because you can't answer all the questions. Yeah. And then you're a Christian, and there's a theme of faith, right? It's something that we're called to possess, and it's a theme, but it's also kind of one of those things where there are certain things that we don't have the answers for, and that requires a level of faith.
Yeah, and to me, it's always been a matter of degree. Mm. I tend to lean towards intellectual thinking and being pragmatic about stuff. I am more grounded in empirical science and that kind of thing. And so for me, not to take out the spirituality of it, but I look at things very pragmatically. And for me, mathematically speaking, scientifically speaking, it does take a lot more faith for me to believe that something just popped into existence rather than having something outside of existence, eternal, that created it. So from a probability standpoint, I don't know what this says about me, but for me, it takes less faith to believe in a creator God than it does the evolutionary stuff. And so that's not a conclusion that other thinkers haven't arrived at. And I can go through and I can start, ticking. Lee Strobel was an atheist. C.S. Lewis was an atheist. And we go down the list. The guy that I mentioned that wrote, Dr. Collins, was an atheist. So you've got these great minds, these great thinkers who've basically, they've reached the same conclusions, and you can't just discount them because they came to those conclusions. Just like, I'm not going to throw an atheist or an evolution under the bus just because they've reached a position that maybe they don't realize at this point doesn't make statistical sense, mathematical probabilities. It doesn't line up. So I have a tendency to just take it easy on that and present, when I have the opportunity to present the facts and say, these two things are very compatible. They don't have to be incompatible.
Yep.
So, all right. Here's a question that I have then as we close things out on this conversation. Can faith and science strengthen one another?
Yeah, 100%. Look at Genesis 1. Like the major elements of science are present in Genesis 1. Space, time, matter.
Herbert Spencer back in 1903. There's elements there that he said, are the backbone of all empirical thinking. In the beginning, which is time, God, which is force, created, it's the action, space, the heavens, and matter, the earth, the five core principles of any scientific principle.
Yep.
And so, in the very first book of the Bible, Moses writes that he had no idea of knowing that those were the five things, but he was inspired by God to lay it all out there.
Yeah, so I think 100% they can strengthen each other. Things like that we see through Scripture. You look at DNA structure and human anatomy. Incredible.
Don't get me started on the Fibonacci sequence.
Fibonacci sequence. Craig Goodness has talked about that 100 times since more than 100
and I
times.
have the T-shirt
100 million times since I've known him.
It's amazing though. It's when you drill down into those levels and you begin to see that type of complexity and design, it just boggles the mind that you could think, nope, that just was randomly happened.
Yep.
Impossible.
Yeah, patterns through nature,
Yep.
like the Fibonacci sequence, mathematical order. I mean, there's so many things that you can say, hey, these are true scientific things that we've discovered, facts. We see it in the scriptures well before they even knew what science was.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I just wonder too if the two positions on this have a hard time reaching, because on one end of the spectrum you've got folks who I think don't want to be answerable to a higher power. Mm-hmm. And that may be like a kind of a harsh thing to say, but when I really stop and think about it, Christians and non-Christians alike, we all kind of have that rebellious spirit in us. And if the people that you have loved, that have loved you, that have nurtured you, share their worldview that says, we're going to believe in evolution, to go against that, that's such a hard thing to walk away from, because now you're rejecting the people who loved and cared for you and their stance. And if they've already passed on and you accept the biblical narrative, things don't look great for them who stayed in that state. And so that's a hard, bitter pill to swallow. And so I have great empathy for people who have a hard time stepping out of the conditioned environment that they maybe have grown up in, Or the other side of it, where you have Christians that walk away from the Christian faith and become atheists because something traumatic has happened in their life. They ask the age-old questions, if God was real, why would he allow bad stuff to happen and that kind of thing? So they deconstruct their faith and they end up on the other side of things.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's all that kind of that pride, rebellious attitude that we have, that we don't want to have to answer to somebody. I want to do what I want to do.
Right.
I don't want to have to follow rules.
Yeah, I mean, Craig, something I think of is when you mentioned deconstruction and kind of the question is, what's your faith built on? And it should be Jesus. Jesus should be the cornerstone of that faith. And so I think that we've seen it. You and I, we've known people that have kind of deconstructed, and actually, in some ways, deconstruction can be a good thing, right? Maybe you build your faith on something that was not actually Jesus. Maybe it was on your parents' faith or a friend's faith or whatever it might be. And so you kind of go through this kind of revelation and you deconstruct and you start putting the right pieces in play, right? Building your faith on something that's eternal.
Yeah.
And the same thing on the scientific side, like deconstruction. That's kind of like the conversion process. If you're able to have that conversation with someone and have been able to do that a few times. So I think that it is a good call for us as Christians to really think about, what is my faith built on? Because we are going to be presented with questions that are going to challenge us.
Yeah.
I remember, as I mentioned before, walking into day one freshman year of college and professor getting up there and saying, hey, what I'm about to teach is fact and is not going to align with your Christian faith.
It's been a good discussion, Brandon. Just as we always do, shout out to our sponsor, Central Church of Christ Ministry League. We've got a podcast after Sunday, Digging Deeper, that is a breakdown, a deconstruction of my sermon each Sunday. And I encourage you to listen to that. It's a great recap of what we've got going on here. Final thoughts?
I'm blanking right now.
You kind of already did the final thought. So I
was like, what's more?
Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. I didn't mean to do that. All right, folks. Until our next episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, be kind of one another, love one another. Remember, the creator of the universe loves you so much that he gave up his only son for you. Have a blessed day.